welcome to this episode of Crossy's Corner. In fact, this one's called Crossy Gets Cornered. So we thought after all these episodes that Martin's been doing, we thought it's time we found out a bit more about Martin Cross, who he is, what he's about. He's had a very interesting career. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to read this off, Martin, because your stats are pretty impressive. So if I got this right, so you learned to row in 1970. You went to your first Junior World Championships in 76, and then your first Senior World Championships in 77. And that year in the middle, you won the Wyfolds. You've won Henley Royal Regatta 10 times. You've been to 18 World Championships, which is one less than Steve Redgrave. And you every year from 1977 to 1994. And the irony is you finished your last regatta with Steve and the Cox pair. Because Johnny got ill, didn't he? And he had to sub in for you, and you guys won the Cox pair.
Yeah, Singer's got ill. We won the small final of the Cox pair.
Final.
Yeah.
So 2 Olympic medals, 4 World Championship medals. Is that all right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think juniors was 75, but apart from that, it was pretty good.
So not many people who row for that many years nowadays. How come you wanted to row for so long?
I think for me, from being not very good at sport at school to discovering rowing and finding that I was good at it, which gave me a sense of purpose, a sense of identity, a sense of who I was in the world. And that was extremely powerful. And it also connected me to other people. And I'm quite an extrovert, so I like those connections. And the more I got into it, the more I identified with being an international rower and being connected with all that kind of scene. And although I got into got into work, got into relationships with Chris, got married, I still saw myself as an international rower. And I didn't want to let go of it for as long as I could. And
because the irony is when you did it, you weren't being paid to do it. I mean, there was a bit of sports head funding towards the end, but actually you had a full-time job and a family, and you still trained twice a day.
Yeah, and as did most people, I guess, apart from Steve Redgrave, who had a philanthropist to support him. But I think the guys we talk about the 4 hours in for Moscow, but we loved what we were doing. I never ever saw it as a sacrifice. It was just something that was so great to be involved with, and it hurt when the bad results came, but then you soon got over that and forgot about it, and then focused on what you could do next year. So I carried on and carried on and carried on for many, many years, probably longer than I should have done, really, in terms of getting a family. And, we had 3 kids by the time I stopped. And the pressure on Chris, my partner, looking back, maybe it would have been sensible to stop before then. But
I think isn't that the case with a lot of international athletes? Probably carry on longer than they should in all sports, really, probably.
Yeah.
So if we go through all those races, I mean, we're not going to go through every year, but what were the most memorable races, events going through the 70s and the early 80s? And then we can talk about your 2 Olympic crews.
Well, I think, one of the most memorable races was the final of the Wyfolds in 76. We'd already won Henley as juniors in 75, but we won it quite comfortably. And the juniors in Montreal that year, we'd won the silver medal. And it was a great race. But I think what I remember about the final of the Wyfolds in 76 was it was on July the 4th. We were racing Potomac, the American crew, American lightweights they were, for the World Championships. And we'd already had a gut buster in the semi-final against Trident. And this race was just, we basically went over at 40. I don't think high rating is anything new, really, but we went over at 40. And we literally got half a length lead just after the end of the island at Henley. and then the positions never changed all the way down the course. It was just going down and down, and they would push and we would push, and it was that hot summer. It was a scorching hot summer, and we just crossed the line. Half a length separating us, and it's one of the toughest races I've ever had at Henley. And it was great to win the Y-folds after the visitors. So that was an extraordinarily memorable race. And then I think one of the most memorable races would be the final of the World Championships in 1978. I was in a 4, and our aim was to make the final that year. And for some reason, in our first heat, the Russians seemed to be messing around because they were one of the 2 favourites with the East Germans. So we beat the Russians in the heat, and nobody expected us to be in the final. So we made the final, and then we're racing in the final, and we went off quite well. And the East Germans weren't having a good row, and essentially, Dave Townsend, our 3-man, looks over. And he sees we're up on the East Germans, and we were hardly ever up on the East Germans. And he thinks that we're leading the World Championships. But what he hadn't seen was the Russians just went off, chow. And the Russians were leading us by about 2 lengths at that point. So Dave's thinking we're leading the World Championships. And we got to 1,000, and then the East just disappeared. But we were in 3rd place. And we finished that race in 3rd place. The East just lost out to the Russians, and we were about 6 seconds down on the Russians, a bit less than that on the East. And it was just phenomenal to win, 2nd World Championships, to have won a medal. It was just like, amazing. Couldn't believe it. I never took that medal off for a week, and it's basically all rotten now because I just wore it with sweat and everything.
Yeah.
So I got it hanging up, but it's like the most dilapidated of all my medals.
And how young were you guys when you raced that race?
I think I was 21. So 3 of us were 21, and Dave Townsend was probably 23.
So you're all pretty young.
Yeah. It was quite remarkable, really. And those are 2 races that really stand out for me.
And what about your race in the pair with Adam in Harswinkel against the Pimenovs?
That was a crazy race. That was. I went into it not thinking that we could win. Jim Clark, who was my teacher and an international rower himself, who's coaching the Italians out there, he looked me in the eye before I went to boat, and he said, you could win this, don't you? And I looked at him, looked him back, and I had a kind of thought bubble that said, you must be mad, because the Pimenovs had beaten us by about 7 seconds in the Lucerne Regatta about 6 weeks before. So I'd given them the race, basically, in my head. I was more than happy for a medal, because a medal in a pair would be great. So we went off the start. We were going so well. We were just so fluid and just natural. We went off the start, and the Pimenovs just went off, and they were out of sight after about 250 meters. I couldn't see their stern, but we were in good 2nd place, moving away from the rest of the field, and the boat felt really good, and I was as happy as Larry, really. And then we go down the lake at Harswinkel, into the 2nd 1,000 where that island is. And basically, out of the corner of my eye, I see this yellow stern just there. And instead of going, right, we'll accelerate through the Pimenovs or some kind of take control of it, I thought, what's that doing there? And then I thought, this is the final of the World Championships, and, the Pimenovs are there. And then I thought, the water's a bit rough here. And we hadn't, because it was a really strong tailwind. I thought, got to be careful in the water. And then I was going outside with all my thoughts. Then I noticed the crews behind us for the first time and thought, they're not far behind. And I started to tense up. And all through the 3rd 500, the natural fluidity was lost, and the other crew started gaining on us. The Pimenovs started moving away again, and my partner was. I was supposed to be doing the calls, but I wasn't doing any because I was kind of shut down. And then we came into the last 500, and Adam Cliff, sort of bowman, basically he used the tactic of screaming at me, effing this and effing that. And all of a sudden, my mind just jumped into, what am I doing? And we just took off in the last 200 or 300 meters. Or 300 or 400 meters, we just took off, and we moved right away from everyone behind us, and then we just started coming right back on the Pimenovs, and we crossed the line, and it was one of those, we crossed the line and we were up, and Adam lay back in his Rochdale accent. He said, "I lay back and I thought I were world champion," and because we were up when we crossed the line, but eventually when they did the photo finish, the Pimenovs won by 800ths of a second. And that was entirely down. I think, if I'd have had belief in that race, we'd have won the world title. It was just an example then, I think, of, what you were aiming for. I think the first bit of the race was such a great row, and there was no pressure. It was kind of like, because we were the second fastest pair there.
But since you talk about having the confidence, you'd already given. So which were the other medals you got then?
Well,
world medals. We'll talk about your Olympics in a minute.
Yeah, we got another bronze medal in the 4 in 79 by virtue of the Russians catching a big crab. The Russians who beat us the year before, and the 2-man was having back injections, cortisone in his back. Anyway, they didn't have such a great regatta, so we beat them. We lost out to the Czechs, who we'd beaten the year before, but got a bronze. So that was one medal. And then in I think it was 91.
91, yeah.
So in 91, we were in this 8, and we were, we had, it was with the Searle brothers, it was with Tim Foster, it was with Johnny Singfield, Anton Obholzer, Richard Stanhope was in it, and we basically called ourselves the SMF, the Sad Men's Firm. And we were kind of, it was really when boats of the team, as the 8, we used to dislike all the other boats in the team, like, Steve and Matt in the pair, and the Cox 4 with, Mulcairns and Beresford. And basically, it was, I don't know, I call it a healthy dislike, but we had a real chip on our shoulder. And by rights, we shouldn't have got a medal that year, because in the first heat we came last by a mile, and we had this big kind of stand-up row. I was going to Johnny, Searle and Greg, you guys in the middle of the boat, you've got to sort of stand up and do something. And Johnny's because I taught Johnny at school, and I kind of realised it was really unhelpful, a teacher of someone having a go.
Yeah.
It wasn't fair. So I kind of shut up. But we basically went out in the repechage. We had to beat the Americans, which we did. It's a really tight repechage, but we had a much better row in the rep. And then for the final, the Romanian 8, the 4 of them won the Cox 4, and they were doubling up in the 8 the next day. And basically it was us and the Romanians, and it was just a typical Cross/Searle charge down the line into the finish. Yeah, and there's a great photograph of us just like, not much ahead of the Romanians. So they got 4th and we got the bronze. And that was I had a great party that night with the Pimenovs. and the Russian team. I think I smoked my first cigarette that night, first and last one maybe, and had lots of vodka. But it was really memorable.
So you talk about the Pimenovs. Obviously, you had a rivalry with the two of them, but you ended up making a good relationship with the two.
Yeah.
And that lasted even after you finished rowing, didn't it?
Yeah, and in fact, I have a good. So Yuri sadly passed away now. He had an operation and got a pulmonary embolism. Came down to breakfast one day and just passed away after the operation. So that was incredibly sad. And I'm in contact with his daughter, Alexandra Pimenova.
Nice.
And helped get a photograph because he's got a lovely gravestone in the cemetery in Moscow with a picture of him on, and Master of Sport Yuri Pimenov and everything. And of course Nick, his son, rowed sculled, and it was he was in that Russian quad where he wasn't one of the ones that tested positive for meldonium, but he was one of the two in it, and I was really I really felt for him that quad couldn't go to the Olympics because that was his Olympic chance, really. So still in close contact. And then Yuri's brother, Nick, I see him. He coaches abroad. I see him from time to time.
Okay.
And, we're like old buddies.
So what was that relationship like? I mean, because the language couldn't have been easier. You're not fluent in Russian, are you?
No. The thing with Yuri was he spoke really good English.
Okay.
Nick Pimenov didn't speak any English at all, but we basically tried through sign language and enjoying each other's company, basically. And there's a kind of just because we weren't together that often, but particularly last night the World Championships. You enjoy each other's company, and they have all the vodka out, all the cold meats and everything, the cigarettes.
Yeah, I remember that in 1990 after the Brandenburg Regatta. It was the weekend that Checkpoint Charlie was shut down, and for some reason the British team stayed for another night, and then we all went on the bus. And I remember the Pimenovs walking down the bus with capfuls of carrot vodka to kick the night off.
Yeah.
So the relationships you've had in the rowing obviously pretty important, aren't they, to you?
Yeah, really important. And I think none more so I think than the first four that I rowed in, because we were together since juniors, three of us, and then Dave came into the four. And we're still very close now, really. In fact, there isn't a person that I've rowed with that I think, I don't want to talk to that person, really.
That's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate in that. And I feel there is a bond when you row with people in a crew, which transposes other kind of relationships, in terms of what you've been through. So, I've had a very close relationship with Adam Clift in a pair.
Yeah.
And the two guys that we did the four with the Seoul Olympics, John Maxey and John Garrett, very close relationship with Tim Foster, Johnny Singfield did a pair with yourself. It just is a sport which creates those links.
And I think that's quite. I mean, it's interesting you saying that because you wonder whether that's still the same now as it's become more professional for people.
Yeah, I don't know actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're talking about relationship. I guess the most important crew is probably the 1980 crew, isn't it? In terms of your relationship and how much you guys keep in touch.
You worked during the process and carried on working afterwards. You didn't get a gold medal because in some ways people could say you were robbed of it because of your opposition. The transition out of rowing, I mean, you all did it at different stages. Martin carried on for quite a lot longer. Compared to today's athletes who, winning is everything, It's a job in their eyes, whereas for you guys, it was something you did and you had a job and family probably. What do you think the difference is? Do you think you can enjoy it more now, enjoyed it more then because it was not win at all cost and not the only thing in your life?
It's a really difficult one, Adrian. I mean, I know I've got with the three other people on this call that are in my crew and David, I've got very, very close and good friends that I absolutely cherish. And we went through something together, and those experiences have built that. There were many years where we didn't keep in much touch, but we do keep in quite close touch now. And I can't think of anything better. All I would say is, had we done different things, different training, different thing, I would much prefer to have this than have, when I do meet, let's just say, some ex-rowing medalists who talk very disparagingly about their experience, the people they rowed with, even though they were successful. I find that quite sad, because this was one of my greatest life's little adventures on the way, and I look back with it with great fondness.
We don't want to give you the impression that every session was roses and. There were some arguments, I've got to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, but they never saw it the way I did, Adrian. That was the problem.
Yeah, that must be a real problem.
Yeah, it is. Christ.
No, I think Ian's right that we are. Well, our situation was not typical in that there wasn't really competition for places. So we felt like a bit like Alex Ferguson would say that the world's against them, and that unites the team, and we always felt that it was us against everybody else. And although, as Dave has alluded to, there were often disagreements, if anyone disagreed with any of the four of us, or in a sort of disparaging way, we would pretty quickly unite, because we were a pretty strong, a very strong unit. And I don't think that you get that in a wider squad situation. So I think we were very lucky to go through that. And there was an element of competition, because we were constantly, as Ian said, every session was hard. We were in pairs a lot. We were always competing around on weight circuits and those sorts of things. So it was very intense, but it was very bonding as well. Yeah, very lucky.
Wow.
So how was that?
That's nice to see that again.
Yeah, it was a really great chat, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I felt really sort of honoured to be able to listen to you guys talk about it, having known each of you. But I hadn't met John, actually. But so what does that four mean to you then, really, beyond just winning your bronze medal in Moscow?
Well, I think it feels a bit like Boys in the Boat, that American book about the 1936 crew. And I saw a letter written by the coxswain of Bobby Mott. And he wrote to one of the guys in the 2004 American 8 that won in Athens, who it might have been Matt Deakey, I can't remember. He was a Husky, and he got a gold medal in the men's 8 in Athens. And Bobby Mott wrote to him and basically said, the most important thing that you will have is your togetherness, your bond as a crew. And that we felt in the 36 crew was worth much more to us than the medal. The bond that we shared and have. And, he talked about the reunions that, were organised for the crew, and, how the Cox was important in that. And it really made me think about what was special about R4, because, we get together and we talk about things, stuff around the meaning of life, stuff around, concerns around, maybe getting ill or things like that, what our kids are doing. Endlessly talk about races that we did, and you know, and basically why we got 3 bronze medals and why we never even thought of winning a silver or a gold medal, and you know what would needed to have been true for that to change. And then we talk a lot about we're all into rowing these days in the current squad system, so we have a closeness, and for a long time we didn't meet together as a crew, but we have that closeness now, and it's very special.
It's interesting because my grand crew at the University of London, same thing. Everybody gets busy, family, kids, and everything, and then as you get into your late 30s, 40s, suddenly kids are a bit more independent, and people's lives, people start having difficulties with their lives and stuff, and it's a group of people you can trust implicitly, isn't it? And you can have these conversations, which I guess guys are generally terrible at doing.
Yeah,
having proper conversations about stuff.
Yeah.
So does that feel like a vehicle for you guys?
It really does. It feels like an important vehicle, and I'm not. Well, I'm sure people have a lot of close groups and friendships, but that feels like a really close group. Which, you know, because we kind of kept it up during lockdown, that we would have a Zoom call every couple of weeks and just talk about things. It feels like an emotional release that guys don't often have. You know, we talk about how we're feeling, and you know, so it's quite a touchy-feely thing, which guys don't often have that kind of experience. And I guess it's not, you know, we can do changing room banter or stuff like that, but you know, it is quite a profound connection.
And do you think that's? I mean, I guess one of the things about running a crew with people is you see people at their worst, don't you? Because everybody's vulnerable when you're exhausted, and you start to trust people even just because of that, don't you? And even if you're not trust people because that you've seen each other at their worst, and they will deliver for you.
Yeah, exactly so. Yeah.
So the big contrast with that crew, if anybody wants to see about that crew, you can go and watch the video about it. It's about an hour. It's fascinating. Then obviously the crew disbanded. Some people gave up, retired. And then it was the next Olympiad. We did the same thing with the 84 crew, which we'll watch in a minute. But what was the journey from finishing Moscow to getting into that crew for LA?
So 81, Ian, John and myself, who you've just seen clips of, Dave Townsend stopped. We rowed with my teacher, Jim Clark, a hero. We didn't have a great season. We had a dreadful World Championships. It was the first time I'd really failed in the World Championships, and we came 10th. Didn't know where to go, didn't know who to talk to. You know, it was one of those, I'd never experienced a sort of feeling like that. And then after that, Ian stopped. Jim Clark went to row in an 8 in 82 with Penny Shooter. David Tanner, our coach, kind of dropped out. John Beattie went to row in Penny Shooter's 8. I kind of just didn't trust Penny for whatever reason, and I decided that I would go and try sculling with this young quad that had raced in Munich, which had Steve Redgrave in and Adam Clift, Eric Sims as it happened, and then so 82 I sculled in a quad, which kind of got a nickname, the quad with the plod, and you know, because we weren't very fast in the season. And the 8 used to make fun of us, you know, 10 lengths down in a blue Carver craft, the blue Carver craft, the blue Carver craft. And anyway, as it turned out in Lucerne, we found a bit of speed. We put Alan Whitwell in the boat for Eric Sims, or Mike Spracklin did, and we basically ended up making the final. So, you know, it was the only time a British quad had been in the final for you know, I think for over 2 decades. That record wasn't broken, sadly. So I got to know Mike Spracklin, I got to know Steve Redgrave, and I think Steve then, because I ended up at stroke of the boat, it went quicker with me at stroke than Steve, and Steve was behind me in the 3C. And Steve said he would he promised, I said in his book, he'd never ever row with me at stroke of a boat again. I think he said stroke rather than in a boat. So 83, there was a kind of all changed the squad system. Penny went out because the 8 hadn't made the final. David Tanner came back in with a guy called Bob Janasek, who'd coached Britain's 8 in Montreal to silver. And I ended up in a 4 with Ian and John and this guy called Richard Budgett, who was in our Olympic 4. And, you know, we had a half decent season. We were the only British crew, heavyweight crew, to make the final of the Worlds, and we finished the distance 6th. So, you know, 81, 82, we finished 6th in the quad in the final. 83, we finished 6th. Now, the thing is that crew had 2 people of the Olympic 4 in, myself and Budge. And there was no reason, no way it should have been that slow. I don't know why we were that slow. So then in 84, it was all change again. Penny Shooter came back. She brought coaching team Graham Hall and Mike Spracklin. And I felt I'd lost, you know, all I had was John Beattie really in the pair. And so we were put in this group, the Coxed Fours group, and there were 3 pairs and Steve Redgrave in the single because he wanted to do the single in the Olympics, and we basically trained against each other. And I was doing all sorts of political things like trying to organise a rowers union, and going around talking to rowers. And you know, we had a big meeting at a school up in London. Over 100 rowers attended, but nothing much came of it. It was called the International Rowers and Scullers Club. But I was very angry. I was an angry man. Yeah.
And was that because now that there was a centralised squad system, which meant you athletes had slightly less control? Is that kind of what you
Yeah, very much so. Exactly. It was the first centralised squad system, which obviously about time too. But I was kind of like, well, I'll just do the pair with John, basically. You know, sod the rest of them.
Yeah. And then the story about all of that, it's best of watching that video. But obviously you guys went and won a gold medal, and it was the first rowing gold medal for the British team for a really very long time. There was an interesting snippet when you and Steve were talking about sort of where, even though you're Olympic champions, where you pitched yourself. And I think we're going to play a bit of video to show a bit of the part of that interview.
I had this thing for a long time of feeling, you know, like I suppose the easiest way to describe it is like I wasn't a proper Olympic gold medalist, like somebody who was famous, like say Steve Ovett or Seb Coe, because I was never very good at sports at school, and I think in the way that, you know, the mind works, I'd kind of created like a tier level of Olympic medalists of people like Coe and Ovett and Daley Thompson, and then me, and it was very unhealthy, I think, for me and my psyche to do that, which it took me quite a while to get over that, really, considering how hard we'd all worked for it and how hard I'd put into it. So I had a very interesting relationship with the actual physical gold medal thing, which basically my dad looked after. It used to be my mum and dad's house, and I've got it now. But I kind of now, when I look at the gold, it's the thing I have left about my dad, really. It reminds me, because my dad was so chuffed with it. That the gold medal, you know, I look after it because it's the sort of leftover of my dad, who passed away in 2004. So I have a very interesting relationship with the actual sort of, you know, physical thing of the medal.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because people often think the gold medal solves a lot of stuff, but it doesn't, does it?
No, it doesn't at all. And that was you know, there was a lot going on in my life there, because I had been in a relationship with one woman up until 84, and then at the same time as continuing that, I started having a relationship with an athlete in the rowing team, so there was a kind of breakup of my first relationship, and I felt incredibly guilty about that. and weighed down by it. And that was happening at the same time as the Olympics, you know, the Olympic result. And it was, sometimes it was even, you know, more important than that, really. I was just dealing with, you know, my own feelings of internal guilt and stuff. And I kind of withdrew from a lot of things. You know, I got asked to go on TV things and this, and said no, you know, don't want to do that. And it was Jim Clark in the end, actually, who said, you know, what are you doing? What do you think you're behaving like? You're being like a complete, you know, idiot. You know, you're an Olympic gold medalist, for God's sake. So it didn't feel like that was the most important thing that happened to me that year. It was very strange.
It's interesting that you talked a few times about Jim Clark. What was he to you?
Well, he was a big hero, because when I was at school, Jim talked to me like I was, you know, I was just hung out with the geeks. I was a bit of an oddball, but he talked to me like I was a normal, you know, bloke, really. One of his mates, he talked about the races he had in Europe, you know, racing the East Germans and the Russians, and, you know, it was going like this. And so I felt incredibly, I guess, inspired. And, you know, I watched him win his silver. I travelled to Lucerne to watch them win their first world silver medal. And that was just an unforgettable trip. And so without Jim, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I wouldn't be a rower, really. Simple as that.
You ended up being then a role model for a lot of boys at Hampton School, particularly the Searle brothers. It's kind of ironic,
I know,
isn't it?
that's, yeah, it's really privileged to be in that position, really. I think, you know, at Hampton, which is a great school, but with a, you know, lads that row, but in particular to have been able to, you know, inspire or help both Johnny and Greg Searle.
I remember Greg talking about that when you came back and you did an assembly with your medal. Yeah, and held it up, you know, which they remember. And I think the story Greg tells was, you know, well, if he can win it, I'm taller than him, because he was getting to be quite a tall boy. So, you know, why can't I do it? It was just, nobody had ever shown me a gold medal in terms of, you know, me growing up. So, you know, I didn't have that role model, and they did, and used it to really good effect. Did you realize that you could have that impact when you made that presentation? That's a good question. I'm not sure that I did. I think now, because people articulate things about inspirational, you know, role models or teachers in their career, I should have known, because it happened to me with Jim Clark, but I don't think I was aware of it. I think Hampton School employed me because I was, you know, an Olympic medalist then. I won the bronze in Moscow. That's why they gave me the job. So I probably should have been more aware of it than I was, I guess. So I guess you were teaching all the time that you were rowing, and then obviously your career came to a bit of an end, and then you wrote this book, which is still for sale. It's a really good read, actually. What motivated you to write? Yeah. So I'd often thought about writing a book, because there weren't many books about rowing, and I knew a lot of rowers, and I knew a lot of stories about rowers, and I wanted to tell stories. And I kind of had my first sort of, I think, breakdown, mental turmoil in '97, and coming out of that, I kind of decided, it was very much a gut feel, cathartic, to write a book. And
and it wasn't like an ordinary book in as much as it was just going to be my story. You know, I made it even more challenging to write because I decided to twin my story, as you know, with 14 other people.
Yeah.
And then quite methodically over the next 3 years, I set out to interview those 14 other people face to face on tape and hear their stories, and then try to work out how I sort of fit that together with my story in 14 chapters. And it got, and I was quite open as well in the book. I think I was more open than I would be now if I was writing about what was going through my mind, about things about relationships, you know, within crews, you know, the breakup of my relationship and stuff in '84 that I was talking about, friendships with other rowers. So that it was really all out there. And I had another, you know, extended period off work and stuff in 2000, and it was before that. I had an agent before then, and she took the chapter which was Soulmates about Redgrave and Holmes together, and you know, my life with Chris when we got married the same year as the Seoul Olympics. And she, you know, took it round publishers, and we got a lot of rejections. And in the end, she said, can't get a publisher. So then after this period where I was unwell in 2000, Chris then, you know, said, right, let's try and get a publisher, you know, let's get you looking over the book again. So I kind of re-edited it, and we found a publisher, and, you know, and he said, oh, this book's great. And so it got published in 2001. And the publisher, it was Breeden Books then, Anton Rippon. He said, you know, this is the best book I've published, which was very nice of him. It was a great sort of relationship. It was only a small publisher, so, you know, there weren't it got nice reviews in some of the newspapers, but it was very cathartic. It was a real, I need to get this out.
I mean, it's a great book because a lot of rowing books are about technique and, you know, physiology and stuff. This was about people, which was great, really. I mean, and you touched on it there. You know, you finished in '94, and you've had your difficulties transitioning out of being a teacher and a rower, then just a teacher. Now you do commentary and writing, and you know, you did have a hard time coming out of all that, and you've had some sort of illnesses and stuff like that in between. How much of that do you think because of giving up rowing, or was it, you said you carried on rowing for too long? Did that just delay the inevitable, or?
Well, I thought I was all right, you know, compared to other people, because I had a job as a teacher, and, you know, I thought I had quite a balanced life. You know, I've got a family, and, you know, there was no need. I wasn't going to get stressed or anything like that. But I think what I did, I collected a lot of, so, you know, in addition to, you know, I was still trying to row. I was still trying to do about 9 sessions a week, even when I stopped rowing internationally in '94, you know. So I wasn't an international rower, but I was still doing these training sessions. And then I was getting more responsibility as a teacher in the school. You know, we had 3 kids, as I say. I used to play the guitar at mass on the Sundays. I was running the local Labour Party. I was running the British Olympic Athletes Commission. I was running the World Rowing Athletes Commission. And I was trying to do other things, and I had all these, you know, balls in the air, and then, you know, stuff comes along, you know, maybe financial stuff or whatever, stress comes into the equation, and then all of a sudden, you know, you start to drop a ball and you get more stressed about that. So, you know, in the sense of, if you want something done, ask a busy person. You know, I was that busy person, really. But I had too many commitments, and you know, and then if a health, what happened the first time was a health. I thought it was a health thing with me basically, and it wasn't. I made it all up. You know, those illnesses came on as a great surprise, and I wouldn't wish them on for the world on anyone really.
Because David Tanner was really good at helping you through that phase, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, particularly. There was one occasion in '97 where, you know, Budge, I was seeing the guy I rode with, Richard Budgett, in the Olympics, and he suggested I go and see a psychiatrist.
Doctor, you weren't seeing him.
Yeah. And David was the guy that took me to the psychiatrist. So I happened then to have an appointment. You know, I thought I was going to die of stomach cancer, you know, at that occasion. And David took me to to see the psychiatrist, who said, well, I'll admit you, but, you know, this is private, and I didn't have private healthcare. So he said, go to this NHS psychiatric hospital. But before then, I had an appointment to see Budge at Northwick Park. And so I showed up with Budge, and David was there, and Budge said, so you think you got stomach cancer, right? Let's do you an endoscopy. So he just like phoned up the endoscopy department, and like 25 minutes later, I'm being wheeled in to have an, you know, it's just like that.
Yeah. And,
you know, I could see the pictures, and I could see that nothing was wrong with my stomach. And it was just like, oh, what an idiot I've been. And I completely, from being totally stressed out and angst and whatever, I completely changed in that moment.
Really?
So much so that when I went to the NHS psychiatric hospital with David that evening, you know, they said, well, obviously, you know, the guy said to admit you, but, you know, you seem fine now. So I went back home that night. Yeah, and David was very helpful in all that, David Tanner.
Yeah. And you said, so you were fine, but were you really? Or were you just okay for that?
I had 2 or 3 panic attacks after that. I was on medication. I had a more profound spell of depression in 2000, a little bit more, and 5 years later in 2005, I had another sort of less long dip. And I had a little dip actually in what would it have been, maybe 2017, maybe 2018. Yeah, so it's been. You know, I've been visited with that. I don't know particularly why, but I have.
But it's been good because you've always been quite open about it, haven't you, with stuff? And
yeah,
you know, there's lots of conversations now about athletes. You know, you interviewed Zoe McBride and stuff like that, and you know, you look at that. It's just part of people's lives, isn't it? It's not an oddity, and it's just good that people are talking about it a bit more now. Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think feeling guilt around it would be the worst thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now you've transitioned out of rowing, and you do your writing and your broadcasting, and now you get to watch the rowing world from the outside. So what are your observations about the state of rowing in the world at the moment?
Well, I think rowing's done incredibly well to transition through the lockdown. It's a big shame about the 2021 World Championships being cancelled. I think that was going to be a big opportunity for the sport, you know, to make connections in Shanghai, maybe sponsorship and so on and so forth. You know, I see with the Olympics, you know, I'm in the middle of the Olympics now in Tokyo, and, you know, I see Thomas Bach turning up to rowing on the finals day to watch. You know, I think rowing is strong in the Olympics.
It's the fourth most watched sport, isn't it? The Olympic Games. The last.
It's a crazy stat or something like that. Yeah. I mean, we were doing commentary for was me and Andy Bodfish, who was my co-commentator in the rowing, and we were doing commentary, and it was going out live to New Zealand, Sky New Zealand. With, you know, they won all those medals. In the New Zealand team, and It was going out live to Canada to CBC, and the Canadian women won the 8s, and it was going out live to NBC. And unfortunately, you know, the Americans didn't win any medals, but to have the chance to talk, you know, and to describe races to that audience is just fantastic.
And how do you think the sport's come along? Because obviously, over the last 20 odd years or so, more money's come into the sport in terms of professionalization. A lot of the countries now have professional systems, which means the racing is just incredibly tight now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is great racing. It's very interesting, the competitive system. I mean, like particularly something like Britain is such a juggernaut system in terms of how much money, how many people they employ. I think David Tanner tells the story, because he used to be performance director, that when he started off with GB Rowing, they employed like 2 or 3 people. And, you know, by the time that he retired, they were employing, I think, over 70 or 80 people, which is a phenomenal amount of, you know, support staff. Yeah. And it's brought its own, you know, style of athletes in terms of, you know, the demands of the training program. It takes a very special person to row through several Olympiads. Someone like Andy Hodge, you know, who carried on rowing through Athens and then Beijing and then London and Rio. And Mo Speehy, who's doing that now. I think, you know, a lot of guys, the guys that stopped after Rio that could have been in Tokyo, was probably because, you know, they inverted commas sacrificed a lot to row in the Caversham system. People like Stan Laludis, George Nash was another real talent, you know. I mean, these guys, they weren't able to, I think like the Awesome Foursome in Australia, when they won their gold medals, they would sort of win a gold medal and then they go off and work.
Yeah. And,
you know, be with their family and train, and they'd take a year out of the Olympics. And then they come back, and you know, you could. I mean, it's not like that in Australia now. You've got to be in Canberra as a man or as a woman in Penrith. But I think that sort of system means that you have to make stark choices about your career. You know, if you're a bright young woman or man, then you know, why would you want your time in that system?
Yeah.
Particularly if you've got a gold medal, like Nash Laludis. Paul Bennett's another one often cited, isn't he? The University of London rower,
yeah.
Rode 6 in the Rio 8. All of them could have made a massive difference to the British team, and they would have been, you know, I'm not sure how old Stan is now, but I don't think he's over 30, is he?
No, I don't think so. But I guess, you know, you look at something like you said, the Americans, and they didn't get a medal. And those guys did work during the Olympic cycle, and they moved out to Oakland during the cycle, and then more full time towards the end. Does that mean you can't win medals that way anymore?
No, I'm not sure. I see, because the American women, you know, it'd be nice to get to talk to them, and you know, hopefully going to chat with Megan Calmo and was Nikki after, you know, in the fullness of time. But I see the American women are full time really, and don't work, and yet they missed a medal. You know, significantly missed a medal. The American men got closer to a medal, didn't they? I remember, you know, looking at that race in the Olympics, and the American bow was not far behind the British on the line. So, you know, maybe with a bit more racing, the Americans might have done something special. It's quite a good system. It's a system that works to get people over in Oakland so Tatey can coach them. Yeah. I'm not sure that full time would have delivered any more for them.
And what do I think of all these other smaller nations, which really are competitive now? You mean like the Greek sculler coming from being in the lightweight forward to winning the single, and it's amazing how many of these smaller nations, the Irish double, are able to produce athletes of that standard.
Yeah, you know, and they've got really high quality coaches. I mean, like you know, the Greeks have got their own coaches. I'm not sure who Intusis's personal coach was, but you know, they've got Gianni Postiglione there, who is, you know, one of the most sort of expert coaches in the world, who's consulting to Lithuania and to Russian, you know. So in terms of, you know, the support and the training, the physiology and stuff, and then in the Irish system, you've got Dominic Casey, but you've also got Antonio Marigiovanni, the performance director.
Yeah.
And you know, and you know, that's a really quite a potent mix that's worked well. And so I think, you know, small nations do have that level of expertise now. You know, the Norwegians, you got Kjetil Borch, who won the silver in the men's single. You got Lars Johan Flodin, who's been the coach for many years. And then you look at the Croatians in the pair. They work with Niki Bralic, you know, in the double when they won in 2016, and the pair when they won in 2020. And so there's a lot of real good expertise. So if you've got a great coach and a great sort of training system, then being a small nation doesn't mean to say that you can't have fantastic success.
I think even in London, you could see that was changing, that there was no longer 6 or 7 gold medals by a dominant superpower like Germany or, you know, and you could see a lot of the countries were kicking themselves because they weren't winning that many medals, but the balance of power has shifted and it's carried on. I mean, I know New Zealand's a bit more of a juggernaut, but even then, you know, 10 people won 2, 3 gold medals.
I think, you know, it's interesting to look at the Dutch, really, the Netherlands. I know they're 8, you know, came 5th and they were really gutted with that result. But, yeah, but they got a lot of success in other boats. Obviously, the double won a medal. You know, the women's double was there. The women's 4 were really close to winning the gold medal, just missed out by that much. You know, I think they won about 5 medals or something. Won the men's quad. The Dutch double didn't win. They got a silver, sorry, behind the French. But the men's quad won. So they have, is it about a €2 million budget or something like that for an Olympiad?
Is that it?
Well, I heard something, I can't remember, you know, that may not be exactly right, but it's nothing like the British budget. Yeah. And they run a great system.
I guess it depends who's paying for the wages as well. If different institutes are paying for wages, maybe the cost is actually higher.
Yeah.
But it's kind of so which is great for the sport, isn't it? That all these different countries can now compete, and it makes the spread of medals broader. I guess what do you think is going to happen with the future with rowing? You know, because there's pressure on us to be too big a sport. There's talk about the coastal stuff. The argument about whether we should do mixed crews or shorten the distance. It's tricky, isn't it, for world rowing to manage the sport through this point?
Well, they're in a very tricky game, world rowing, in terms of the Olympics, because I think rowing is sure of its place in the Olympics, but because it's a big number sport, you know, like having to do the prep for the commentary, you've got, you know, 500 or so athletes. That if the Olympics want to get new sports in, they basically say other sports have got to give up their numbers. So rowing is now down to the bare bones of a program in the Olympics, you know. So you'd say, okay, well, let's lose a men's or women's 8. You know, if they say we've got to lose 20 seats, but then that is going to lose. You're only going to have straight finals in the 8s then, because there's 6 crews. Yeah. And then, so you don't have a program, or, you know, then you'd say, take out maybe some of the light, you know, the big entries like the men's or women's single, or the, you know, the lightweight men's or women's double scull. But in those programs, you've got this amazing universality, you know. I mean, we had, I can't remember, was it, it was Benin and Vanuatu on the F final of the men's single sculls, just 2 scullers. But, you know, we had, and you can see the Malaia from, was it the Iranian sculler, in the last 12, the Indian double making the Singhs making the last 12 in the lightweight men's double. So you don't really want to lose your universality. So in that sense, rowing's got some real decisions to make. If the program gets more truncated, what it's going to lose. You know, if it went down to 4 lanes, maybe it could still have an Olympic program. I think that. So that's when you come into saying, well, what about doubling up? Like I'm just working here doing the canoeing and kayaking preparation for commentary. You know, they have loads of doubling up in that. You know, you've got Lisa Carrington doing 4 events, the New Zealand kayaker.
Yeah.
She's doing the K1 200, the K1 500, the K2 500, and the K4 500. You know, so then it goes, well, what about rowers doubling up between pair and 4 and 8 or something like that? So I think those arguments will.
Do you think we have a problem then also because we don't really have personalities in the sport in the way that other sports do? Do people really know who the superstars are? Or the Chris Hoys or the Michael Phelpses or that kind of thing?
No, I don't think they do actually. You know, I think the interviews that we do, you know, help a bit in terms of, you know, getting talking to and getting under the skin of people. I think, you know, Glover's story was obviously, Helen Glover, you know, was obviously very compelling. And that was the main media focus for, you know, Britain and the Olympics. And it would have been great. I was very surprised they got that close to a medal, actually. I didn't think they would, but, you know. And I suppose Glover had the focus that nobody else in the team has had since probably, James Cracknell stopped?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And so we don't have those figures that are really compelling to the public. But, you know, other nations like, you know, got New Zealand colleagues on the commentary teams out here. And, you know, the New Zealand 8s winning is absolutely massive for New Zealand sport. And, you know, what it was like in the 72 8 became legendary. And so they got Hamish Bond with 3 gold medals.
Yeah, amazing.
Be like a megastar. So, you know, it's a shame really. Ollie Zeidler was, you know, like would have been a big personality in Germany. That would have been a great story if Ollie had sort of had success in the Olympics here.
Yeah.
So I think the potential for rowing to have stars is there. But it depends. I think the Croatians, the Sinkovic brothers, you know, are massive stars within Croatia.
Yeah.
Just we don't have athletes, you know, like Mo Spihi is Olympic champion. Mo Spihi is the highest, sort of most successful athlete we got in the men's team, but he's not very well known.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as a sport, generally, we're just not, even though we're so well viewed at the Olympics, we're not very good in between the Olympics.
Yeah.
And raising our profile.
Yeah, yeah.
So Martin, it's been brilliant doing this. I know I've spoken to people over the last year and a half or so about Crossy's Corner, and people absolutely love the stuff you're doing, the way you tap people. I mean, from people from all sorts of walks of life, just tune in and love what you're doing. So really appreciate you giving the time to have a chat about your side of stuff. Man.
That's brilliant, Adrian. Thank you. I've loved it as well.
Cool. Enjoy the rest of the week.
Yeah. Hey.
Cool. Okay. Cheers.